The 70s gave us some incredible music, but it also gave us songs that made people change the radio station immediately. Some were overplayed to death, others were just plain annoying, and a few were so saccharine they could give you a toothache. These are the top 10 most hated songs of the 1970s. Number 10, Feelings, Morris Albert, 1975. This song didn't fade out. It wore people down until they surrendered. Morris Albert's 1975 ballad became one of the most divisive songs of the decade. It climbed all the way to number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and seemed to be everywhere almost overnight. That was the problem. The song didn't just become popular, it became unavoidable. Radio stations played it constantly. Lounge singers adopted it immediately. Elevators, waiting rooms, and hotel lobbies turned it into background noise you couldn't escape. The issue wasn't only the sentimentality, though that certainly didn't help. Feelings leaned hard into syrupy emotion, stretching the word itself over and over until it stopped sounding meaningful. The melody was painfully simple and endlessly repetitive. Critics quickly pointed out that once you'd heard the chorus, you'd heard the entire song. There was nowhere for it to go. What really pushed listeners over the edge was the orchestration. Lush but generic, it sounded like dozens of other mid-70s ballads stitched together. Every instrumental break followed the same predictable chord progressions. On repeated listens, the song became grating rather than comforting. Public opinion turned with remarkable speed. People who initially liked it grew embarrassed to admit it. Feelings went from hit single to cultural punchline in a matter of months. Albert never escaped its shadow. The song even introduced a sarcastic phrase into pop culture, used to mock overly emotional music. Few songs burned out faster or harder. Feelings didn't just overstay its welcome, it made people regret answering the door. Number 9. Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree, Tony Orlando and Dawn, 1973. At first, this sounded hopeful, and then it just wouldn't stop playing. This song was absolutely inescapable in 1973. It spent 4 weeks at number 1 and sold millions of copies almost instantly. And because it was such a massive hit, it played everywhere. Radio stations wore it out. Public spaces echoed with it non-stop. What initially felt catchy quickly became exhausting. The premise is darker than many people remember. A man leaving prison writes to see if his wife still wants him. If she does, she'll tie a ribbon around a tree. If not, he'll keep moving. It's a story rooted in uncertainty and fear, but the production completely ignores that complexity. Instead, the song is relentlessly cheerful. Bright instrumentation, forced optimism, and a melody so catchy it bordered on irritating. Once it got stuck in your head, it refused to leave. Tony Orlando's performance leaned heavily into manufactured enthusiasm, while Dawn's backing vocals added layers of sweetness that felt almost infantilizing. The arrangement used every early 70s pop trick in the book. Strings, hand claps, a driving beat, all designed to keep it upbeat no matter what the lyrics suggested. Overexposure killed whatever charm it once had. By summer, it was impossible to attend a wedding or walk through a hotel lobby without hearing it. Even Orlando later distanced himself from it. The song launched their variety show career, but it also became one of the most divisive hits of the decade. By the time the ribbon faded, so did the public's patience. Number 8. Afternoon Delight, Starland Vocal Band, 1976. This song smiled so hard it forgot how uncomfortable it was making everyone. When Afternoon Delight was released, many listeners didn't immediately catch what it was about. Once they did, reactions shifted quickly. The song tried to make midday romance sound wholesome and playful. Instead, it came across as awkward and uncomfortable. The production was aggressively upbeat, sugary harmonies, bouncy arrangements, and an earnestness so intense it felt unintentional. It sounded like a parody of soft rock, except it wasn't joking. The clash between cheerful delivery and suggestive lyrics created an uneasy listening experience. What made it worse was who was singing it. Two married couples performed the vocals, delivering lines about sneaking away with wide-eyed enthusiasm. For many listeners, it felt less charming and more embarrassing, like watching adults desperately try to seem youthful. Despite the discomfort, the song became a massive hit. It reached #1 and even won a Grammy, baffling critics and listeners alike. Radio stations played it relentlessly. By the end of summer, groans followed its opening notes. The band never replicated the success. Over time, Afternoon Delight became a cultural joke, routinely appearing on lists of the worst songs ever recorded. Even fans of 70s soft rock often draw the line here. It's remembered as a perfect example of how wrong things could go when innocence and innuendo collided. Once the joke landed, all that was left was the awkward silence. Number 7. Seasons in the Sun. Terry Jacks, 1974. This was meant to make people cry. Instead, it made them reach for the dial. On paper, this should have been heartbreaking. Seasons in the Sun tells the story of a dying man saying goodbye. The original melody came from a Belgian song, and the English lyrics were written to be deeply emotional. But the execution changed everything. Terry Jacks simply couldn't sell the material vocally. His voice was thin and reedy, lacking the strength needed for such heavy subject matter. Instead of sounding poignant, the performance came across as whiny. High notes cracked awkwardly, and phrasing often emphasized the wrong words. The production didn't help. The arrangement wrapped the story of death in an oddly cheerful melody. The disconnect between lyrics and music created a strange emotional confusion. Listeners were told to feel joy while being reminded repeatedly of mortality. Still, it became a massive worldwide hit. That meant constant airplay, and during a decade already weighed down by political and social turmoil, many people didn't want to hear a song about dying every time they turned on the radio. Critics accused it of emotional manipulation. Rather than earning tears, it seemed to demand them. Public opinion soured quickly, and the song remains divisive to this day, defended by some but remembered by many as one of the most irritating hits of the era. It asked for tears but earned eye rolls. Number 6. Billy Don't Be a Hero. Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods, 1974. This song tried to turn tragedy into a sing-along, and paid the price. This song aimed for tragedy and landed in melodrama. Billy Don't Be a Hero tells the story of a woman whose lover dies in war, but everything about the execution felt artificial. The lyrics were heavy-handed, the emotions were exaggerated, and the performance pushed drama to uncomfortable extremes. The arrangement was typical mid-70s soft rock, strings, acoustic guitars, and polished production. The problem was that it sounded far too pleasant for the story it was telling. Instead of evoking loss, it felt like background music in a department store. Vocally, the song leaned hard into forced emotion. Every line was delivered as if maximum feeling might compensate for a lack of subtlety. Radio stations loved it. It hit #1 and sold millions. But listeners quickly grew tired of being emotionally manipulated. Critics were harsh. Many pointed out that while the song framed itself around the Civil War, it was clearly meant to echo Vietnam, without actually confronting it. That distance made it feel dishonest. War was reduced to a sentimental story rather than a serious subject. The band never matched the success. The song lives on as a staple of worst song lists, remembered as a cautionary example of how 70s pop could mishandle serious themes. By the end, the drama felt louder than the loss. Number 5. Muskrat Love, Captain and Tennille, 1976. There's novelty, and then there's singing about rodents in love. Few songs from the 1970s inspired as much collective confusion as Muskrat Love. Captain and Tennille's 1976 hit was not a metaphor. It was not satire. It was, quite literally, a song about two muskrats falling in love. Muskrat Susie, Muskrat Sam. Their courtship described in earnest detail, complete with synthesized sounds meant to resemble muskrat noises. The song reached #4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and climbed all the way to #1 on the Easy Listening chart. That success guaranteed constant radio play, which only magnified the problem. The lyrics described rodents nibbling bacon, chewing cheese, and engaging in behavior that was clearly meant to sound romantic. Instead, it sounded bizarre. The production leaned into novelty rather than subtlety. The electronic muskrat effects at the end of the song were looped endlessly on the 45's run-out groove, continuing until the listener physically lifted the needle. For many people, that detail alone turned mild annoyance into outright hostility. What truly sealed the song's fate was its White House performance. In July 1976, Captain and Tennille performed Muskrat Love at a state dinner honoring Queen Elizabeth II. Singing about mating rodents before British royalty became a national punchline. One guest called it embarrassing. The press agreed. From that moment on, the song stopped being quirky and became humiliating. It has topped worst song lists ever since, standing as one of the most infamous novelty hits in pop history. What started as quirky ended as a national embarrassment. In number 4, You Light Up My Life, Debbie Boone, 1977. This song wasn't hated at first, it was played into submission. You Light Up My Life was the biggest hit of the decade. It spent 10 consecutive weeks at number 1, won major awards, and dominated airwaves through 1977 and beyond. And that overwhelming success is exactly why it became so widely hated. The song was everywhere. Radio stations played it relentlessly. Weddings, school dances, department stores, elevators, there was no escape. What might have been a gentle ballad quickly turned into background noise torture through sheer repetition. The production was relentlessly sweet, sweeping strings, gentle piano, and layer upon layer of soft orchestration designed to maximize emotional response. Debbie Boone's vocal performance was technically clean, but emotionally flat. Even Boone later admitted she had no creative control and was instructed to replicate the demo exactly. The result sounded manufactured rather than heartfelt. The lyrics were deliberately vague, allowing the song to function as both romantic and religious. That universality made it popular and also unbearable. It tried to mean everything and ended up feeling meaningful to no one. Critics called it trite and syrupy. DJs began apologizing before playing it. Comedians joked about it being used as torture. The backlash was so intense that Boone's pop career never recovered. Despite awards and sales, the song became shorthand for everything people disliked about late 70s easy listening: overproduced, emotionally hollow, and impossible to escape. By the time it ended, silence felt like relief. Number 3, Having My Baby, Paul Anka, 1974. This was supposed to be sweet, and somehow became exhausting. Paul Anka's 1974 comeback hit returned him to the top of the charts for the first time in years, but it also ignited one of the decade's most uncomfortable pop controversies. Having My Baby was meant to celebrate impending fatherhood. Instead, it left many listeners deeply uneasy. The production followed the familiar mid-70s soft rock formula: strings, acoustic guitars, and gentle pacing. The real issue was the lyrics. The repeated phrase, "You're having my baby," struck many as possessive and outdated, even at the time. Feminist critics were particularly vocal, pointing out that the woman's perspective was completely absent. Anka's vocal delivery leaned heavily into sincerity, almost to the point of strain. Every word was emphasized as if trying to convince the listener of its emotional weight. Rather than sounding intimate, it felt exhausting. Radio overplay made things worse. By late 1974, many listeners changed stations immediately when it came on. Critics called it cloying, condescending, and socially tone-deaf. Ironically, controversy only boosted sales. The song became a massive hit, but it damaged Anka's credibility with younger audiences. He became associated with exactly the kind of sentimentality that punk rock would soon reject. Decades later, the song remains one of the most mocked tracks of the era, remembered less as a celebration and more as an example of how pop sentiment can cross into discomfort. Number 2, Shannon, Henry Gross, 1976. This song didn't knock, it barged in with grief. Shannon was written sincerely. Henry Gross composed the song after learning that Carl Wilson's beloved dog had died. It was heartfelt and personal. But sincerity alone didn't save it from becoming one of the most disliked hits of the decade. The song reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100, ensuring heavy radio rotation, and that's where the problem began. Shannon is unrelentingly sad, detailing the death of a pet in explicit emotional terms. Listeners didn't want to be confronted with grief during their commute or at social gatherings. The production leaned heavily into softness. Gentle acoustic guitars, strings, and Gross's earnest vocals combined into what many felt was emotional overload. The song never offered relief. It asked the listener to sit with sadness from start to finish. Radio overplay turned that sadness into irritation. The song became infamous for clearing rooms at parties. People groaned when it started. Critics were mixed, but public opinion hardened quickly. For many, Shannon represented everything wrong with mid-70s soft rock: overdone emotion, manipulative production, and subject matter too heavy for a pop single. Gross never had another hit of similar magnitude. The song defined his career, not as a triumph, but as a cautionary tale about emotional excess. Eventually, people stopped listening, not because they didn't care, but because they couldn't anymore. Number 1. Disco Duck, Rick Dees, 1976. This was the moment novelty officially went too far. Disco Duck was never meant to be taken seriously. That didn't stop it from becoming one of the most infamous number 1 hits in pop history. Rick Dees recorded the song as a novelty, layering duck noises over a basic disco beat. Somehow, it exploded. It reached number 1 in October 1976 and sold millions. That success quickly became its downfall. Radio stations played it constantly. Children loved it. Parents endured it. What might have been mildly amusing once became unbearable through repetition. Musically, there was nothing to discover. A simple 4-on-the-floor beat, a basic bass line, endless duck quacks. Once the joke landed, there was nothing left. The timing couldn't have been worse. The song arrived just as backlash against disco was beginning to build. Disco Duck became Exhibit A for everything critics hated about the genre. When anti-disco sentiment peaked a few years later, this song was held up as proof that disco had gone too far. Even Dees distanced himself from it. Follow-ups like Disco Gorilla failed completely. The song appears on virtually every worst songs list ever compiled. It became shorthand for novelty records that should never have existed. Commercial success couldn't save it. Disco Duck remains a symbol of excess, overplay, and how popularity and quality often have nothing to do with each other. One joke, 6 million sales, and a reputation that never recovered. The 70s gave us incredible music that still holds up today, but it also gave us these songs that people love to hate. Some were annoying from the start, others became unbearable through overplay, and a few were just plain ridiculous. They're part of the decade's legacy, for better or worse, reminding us that even in music's greatest eras, not everything ages well. Sometimes the most successful songs become the most hated, proving that popularity and quality don't always go hand in hand. If you enjoyed this trip through music history, give us a like and subscribe for more, and let us know in the comments which of these songs you remember hating or secretly still enjoy.